Oklahoma. Cool. Telling you, I've been out here in the woods now for 15 years, and I haven't even looked at my. See, all the more reason to say I lost it. So Jim lives in the woods of South Carolina, where he went in pursuit of a natural faith, which I really enjoy reading about him only in part. So we'll return to your biography, but just to bring you up to date so I don't tease people along too far, we're talking about a new, and this is not new in terms of the themes of it or even the event, but it just happened. Kenya police, according to the BBC, are investigating the deaths of 4 people suspected to have starved to death on the orders of the leader of a controversial cult. Pastor Mackenzie Msenge is alleged to have told his followers in the coastal area of Kilifi to starve themselves in the hope of getting to heaven more quickly. Well, following a tip-off, police found 15 seriously ill people on Thursday. Only 11 made it to the hospital alive. And then the reports are, and these are verifiable reports, that there is a mass grave somewhere in this jungle where the people who didn't even make it this far were buried by those who survived it up until yesterday. Wow. Well, doesn't that have a very familiar ring to it, to a millenarian cult where the leader positions themselves as some sort of arbiter of salvation, but would rather see its own followers or her followers, in very rare cases, die than to have them see that he never had the power, never had the pipeline to God that he claimed to. Talk about Jim Jones, huh? Well, yeah, exactly. And Jim Jones is coming from a long line of Jim Joneses. Yeah. There was a time back in the 70s, 80s, I guess, when Jim Baker was having his trouble, and Jim Jones was having his trouble, and Jimmy Swaggart was having his trouble. I began to wonder. And when you think about it, although Jim Jones is certainly the most notorious of that group, they all kind of follow a similar pattern of starting to believe their own publicity, and then that is the case. And the fact that this happened recently in Kenya, brings out something that's just. When I started out to write this book, I was expecting to talk about all kinds of cults from all over the world, and it just got so big. I know I couldn't do it, so I had to limit it at the request of the publisher to American cults. But what's happening here is, just because they're American cults doesn't mean it's not going on other places, obviously. So, well, that's the long tradition of European cults. These we call them millenarian cults that are trying to bring about the millennium for people who don't know. And there are many like that in the United States, but there were just literally hundreds of them in the Middle Ages, in every language, in every country, and many of the first founders that came to the United States came out of that same cult mentality. It's hard for us to think about this in these terms because most of us have grown up in traditional classrooms, and they take us back to the Pilgrims, for instance. So we talk about the Pilgrims, and the history books talk about these far-seeing people who were looking to build a city on a hill and all this kind of thing. What we forget, though, is that where the Pilgrims came from, they were called separatists, or the Puritans, rather. They were called separatists, and when they came here, they were not coming here just to build their mythical city on a hill, but they were coming here because they were leaving the persecution in the old country, and it was because they were called a cult. And when they came here, we would love to say they had a happy ending, everything was great. But the story of Puritanism in New England, it seems as soon as they got here and got settled down and started forming some big cities, they turned into a cult themselves. It was either our way or the highway. They drove out the Quakers, for instance, after beating them and whipping them and driving them out of town on a rail. They basically arrested a lot of the women who were living different kinds of lives and called them witches. And witch trials took place. And Cotton Mather, who was one of the foremost preachers of his day, one of the leaders of this exclusive cult called Puritanism, he went to the Salem witch trials and just sat there and watched and didn't open his mouth. Now, they didn't stay that way. I mean, I belong to a denomination which has its roots partially in New England Congregationalism, and it's called, it's a relatively liberal denomination now. But back then, there was a perfectly good reason for calling the Puritans a cult. They acted like it. They imposed their own will. They drove out people who didn't believe as they did. And it's kind of an American DNA ever since.
Well, and they killed people.
Yeah.
So I mean, let's that was not an anomaly. We've done enough shows of the Salem witch trials on Coast to Coast AM over the years to just kind of always remind people this was not an offshoot. This wasn't a faction. This is when the mainstream theology of the Puritans became so twisted that it eventually began to eat its own tail. Yeah. Which is what happened. And so whether it's in Salem or Salem Town, and there's all sorts of. I mean, to take the tour up there is illuminating. The idea of who qualified as a witch, and then what that liberated them to that person. Yeah. That's kind of the scariest thing, and it's sort of part of what we still see carried through in the story of American cults here still to this day.
Yeah. And the part that was so strange about that is here was this group that had the Spanish Inquisition and the fresh in their minds. It was going on in Europe at the same time, and it carried on here when the conquistadors came into Mexico and later into Central America and all that. Here they were, a group claiming absolute power and destroying people, destroying the books that didn't agree with them. The Mayan texts were destroyed. People were killed and everything else. So
and then they enslaved people who did not agree with them. Which again is something we see common in a lot of cults, that idea of captivity, and we might say might refer to it almost as a kind of Stockholm syndrome. That denied protein, keep them locked up until they agree to become one of us, and then that's okay. Then they start to enjoy privileges again.
Yeah, and that's absolute cultic behavior. That's why I tend to try to not label organizations or cults as a whole.
Right.
Because let's face it, there were some really far-seeing and the Puritan stock. Even though they were living in a culture that was opposed to what they did, and there were some fine people. Some of the friars who were in Mayan country and everything else, you just can't label them all as hell. But when a group begins to use what I like to call cultic methodologies, and when it begins to revolve around and kind of form around the central methods of what cults do and the methods that they use, then you've got to say, well, let's call it what it is, And it's a dangerous thing that is so common in American history.
Yeah. And we see it played out again, as you're pointing out, all over the world. And again, for this particular story, this comes from Kenya, which sees a lot of these, and they're sort of semi-Christian, or they adopt aspects of Christianity, particularly apocalyptic thinking, as sort of the capstone that gives them the right to determine who lives, who dies, who stays, who goes. And people seem willing to hand over their own faith, their own future. Well, the concept, and we hold it here, of kind of rugged American individualism cults coddles corruption and charismatic leaders. And here's what I want to avoid. I want to avoid getting into the weeds of politics because, and I know you'll understand this. It's too soon for some people to get, and it could be Democratic, it could be liberal, it could be conservative issues. We're just not. Let's avoid that so that I'm not answering those calls for the rest of the night. And instead, I mean, the broader brush, these bigger themes are enough for us to tackle in the time that we'll have on the air. Yeah. What defines
the themes are the important thing because you will find them in religious organizations, but as you say, you'll also find them the same kind of ideas or methodologies sometimes in politics.
right?
In academia, one of the yes, that's it.
Right.
Certain cults and certain
Right.
things that have to be believed. I found them in science. When I really get my book in history, I talk a lot about the scientists who were just basically kicked out of the club. They didn't agree with the proper notion of the time.
They didn't please the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers of science are just as egotistical as gatekeepers in any other profession.
Yeah, and you just said the right word. I think that egotistical. One of the clear things that reveal what a cult is generally speaking, they either begin or still have as a founder of egotistical. It's not at all uncommon to find narcissists who feel entitled or grandiose, and they are at the center not only of their own story but every empathy, and they display unmistakable arrogance, and they're surprisingly normally in search of validation, but they might feel at least a small sense of shame when they do wrong. It's because they got caught, and it undermines their self-esteem. But how easy it is for a narcissist counselor to go farther and actually become a psychopath. And the difference in terms of psychology between those two is that psychopaths normally don't feel any shame. And that's, most people don't realize it, but that's why psychopaths generally pass lie detector tests. They honestly feel they can do no wrong. They're doing the right thing. And the reason they feel that way is because they're the ones performing the deeds. And if they do something, it's obviously justified because they're the ones doing it. It's a terrible path to come down. And people listening may have been associated with this same kind of people on a much smaller scale. You know, the friends who say, "Oh, I'm only saying this for your good." Right? If they're telling them, or you always act this way, or if your integrity is questioned by means of passive aggressive domination. This is manipulation. And cult leaders do this instinctively. They are master manipulators and use their abilities to their advantage.
Camouflage.
But what we don't usually fall into is it's just not a manipulator. A manipulator has to have someone to manipulate. And there are a lot of people who don't want to be leaders. They're confused. They may feel like they're not sure what the answers are, and so they will say to the cult leader, make it easy for me. What to do, put it on a bumper sticker so it's easier. It's easier for me just to not worry about it. I'll do whatever you say. I'll follow along. And that's how cults are born.
We'll pick up right there, then coming up in just a minute with author Jim Lewis, American Cults, Coddles, Corruption, and Charismatic Leaders. I'll read you a little bit more, too, about this story from Kenya. Shocking, but also really familiar, because this is what happens when narcissism gets weaponized and it becomes a sociopathy, a psychopathy like that, where the cult leader has to surround him or herself with people that are always confirming them, because that's how fragile they really are. Next, on Coast to Coast AM, this is Nirvana.
You're fucked.
Termite Rob. Search PacificCoastTermite.com
or call 800-PACIFIC. KFI News on the air and when it breaks.
I'm Amy King in the KFI 24-hour newsroom. One person has been shot outside the TCL Theater near Hollywood and Highland in Hollywood. Police say the shooter and a woman ran off and crossed a red line heading to North Hollywood. The 22-year-old student at Cal State Long Beach is facing charges for taking hundreds of photos and videos of people in restrooms, locker rooms, and other locations around campus. So far, only 2 victims have been identified. He was just facing 2 charges, but more could be coming. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says there's a 62% chance El Nino will arrive between May and July to rain and colder temperatures for California. The Super Mario Brothers movie is smashing records. It passed the $500 million mark globally. It's made more than $250 million in the U.S. alone, and is expected to bring in another $58 to $66 million this weekend, its second weekend in theaters. Definitely weather from KFI, clouds in the morning, sunny for tomorrow afternoon, highs in the mid-50s to mid-70s, near 80 in the IE. It's 58 in Buena Park, 54 San Clemente. We lead local in the KFI 24-hour newsroom. I'm Amy King.
In Houston, Interstate 40 freeway closure for 405 northbound from Field Boulevard to 22. South End and only shut down for road work until 5. And in Florence, this is on the 405 southbound right before Crenshaw Boulevard. We have a crash there, taking up the 2 left lanes. Watch for some slow traffic from the 91. Rosemead, there is a work zone. This is on the 60 westbound from Rosemead Boulevard to Lindley. 3 right lanes are going to be shut down for road work. Expect slowing in that area. KFI in the sky. Hope you get to this after Friday, Dan.
This report is sponsored by Insperity, providing scalable HR services, access to better benefits, payroll, and HR technology for over 35 years. Insperity mission is to help businesses succeed so communities prosper. Insperity, HR that makes a difference. Visit Insperity.com.
Still waiting for your employee retention tax credit. This 2 credit shows the government may be slow, but small business can't be. Our ERTC loan offers cash now for your tax credit with funding in as little as 72 hours. ERTC loans keep your business going with interest-only payments for up to 12 months. For more info, call 800-381-0187. That's 800-381-0187. And go to biz2credit.com/ERTC loan for full terms and conditions.
Business owner, CEO, or responsible for marketing? If you are, our media can help you reach your goals and find new customers. We reach more consumers in your target area than anyone else. And we can give you access to those potential customers more cost effectively across radio, digital, podcasting, and social. We love to show you how our media can work for you. From your cell dial #250 and say keyword great results. That's #250 and say great results. KFI.
That's my channel, so really.
I know people clutch their pearls when you throw any shade at the sanctity of elections, but it is a shoddy business.
Votes get lost. Votes don't get counted. Votes appear out of nowhere. We like to assume that elections are this absolutely pristinely run mechanism. Here in Canada, the idea that there wouldn't be problems is betting on a miracle. Live 9 to 1 p.m. on KFI and on demand anytime on the Radio app. KFI AM 640.
You see that? Dude, you did that in less than 5 minutes. That's speedy Gonzalez, though.
You forget it's really all about, and that is in fact the pinball wizard's perspective on Tommy, is that he's a cult leader. He's got all these people following him. They'll do anything he tells them to do, which in a way goes to Tommy's head. It's kind of the central theme of that and the conversation we're having tonight. American cults, tunnels, corruption, and charismatic leaders. We'll get to open lines coming up later on tonight. Jim Willis is our guest. We'll get back to him in just a second. Tom Danheiser is a featured performer on Beyond Belief with George Norrie. I feel like I have to go to church tonight. It's the ordained minister's night. I know. And I really enjoy that aspect of what he writes because he's really hitting it at a point where people don't realize so much of what things like Waco and other things that happen. It's so central. It comes always back to religion and how we get manipulated, and it's very important for us to to sort of stand guard over our own minds. I haven't seen this new one though, Beyond Belief with Elizabeth April, but I love the theme, Meeting with the Galactic Federation.
Yeah, she's hot right now, and she did a whopping great show for us, as all our shows really. So if you head over to beyondbelief.com right now, we have an example of a couple shows that you can watch, and there's also a 7-day free trial you can sign up and see. We must have done like 500 shows now, so you get access to all those. Plus, you get access to all the videos and things that are on the Gaia Network. So we'd like you to go to beyondbelief.com.
Here's all I want to know about the Galactic Federation. Please tell me they were wearing different colored pajama tops. Star Trek. That's what I want to. Some were gold, some were red, some were no.
Well, you ask April, we'll get back to you on that.
Well, because I watched your episode 5 about psilocybin and LSD, and I was surprised when you and George took mushrooms.
Yeah,
so I wanted to.
We didn't get a sample that show.
Yeah, it was a twist that I was not expecting on Beyond Belief, but I might add, George is a very good dancer.
So we do a lot of fun stuff on that show. It really is worth watching, especially if you are a fan of this show, because it's kind of an extension, and you get to kind of see what you're listening to sometimes, and it's just really fun stuff.
Great. Well, I know people will enjoy it. The Price is Right. Find out more at coasttocoastam.com.
Brand, they've been providing superior nationwide coverage for more than 25 years. Switch today and save up to half on your wireless bill. They offer unlimited talk and text with flexible data plans starting at just $20 a month. Their award-winning customer service team makes switching easy. You keep your phone and number, and activation is free. Plus, you can add a family member to your plan for just $15 a month per line. Never worry about dropped calls, because Consumer Cellular has the exact same coverage as the major carrier, with coverage to over 99% of the nation. And this is all backed by their 100% risk-free guarantee. Also, with Consumer Cellular, you can save up to $250 a year. Go to consumercellular.com/Nori, and for a limited time, get $25 off your wireless bill when you use promo code Nori. That's consumercellular.com/Nori, and use promo code Nori for $25 off.
Attention taxpayers, if you're facing IRS debt you can't afford to pay, then you need to take advantage of the new Taxpayer Relief Initiative to free yourself from IRS collection efforts once and for all. Due to the financial hardship consumers are facing, the IRS has made it easier to settle delinquent tax problems. You may qualify for significant tax savings. An open phone line has been established by Community Tax for consumers to call and see if they qualify. Take down this number stored in your cell phone, but call the Community Tax Helpline at 800-508-0328. If you owe back taxes to the IRS and cannot afford to pay them back, or you even have years of unfiled tax returns, you may now find the relief that you need. Call the Community Tax Helpline today at 800-508-0328. Don't take on the IRS alone. They can attack your wages, savings, pension, home, and even your Social Security check. Call 800-508-0328 for your free consultation and to see if you qualify. That's 800-508-0328.
I like this quote I'm going to share it from your website, jimwillis.net. When I retired to the woods of South Carolina, I wanted to experience a passion similar to those who built Stonehenge, strong enough to inspire me to move megaton boulders halfway across England. That is to say, I retired with an agenda. Okay, God, it's you and me, no structures, no restrictions, no theology, no holds barred, 24 hours a day. You are my only passion. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Did you build a henge, by the way?
It was quite a time when I went into ministry back in 1972, I guess it was, and I was in school. I kind of had the idea that I'm sure you had it, I'm sure we all had it, that when you get out of school and you become the pastor of a congregation, you join a community that is interested in growing together, spiritual growth, and leaning on one another and answering life's great questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And all that kind of thing. And I was just looking forward to this great life of dealing with the big issues. And as we all know, it doesn't work out that way. Most churches are, involved in a lot of things that have nothing to do with any of it. And you become kind of CEO of a small corporation, and you're always involved in the next thing, the next sermon, the next church service, the next Bible study, the next seminar, the next deacons meeting or trustees meeting. We're worrying about raising money, and you have to be worrying about all this kind of stuff. And pretty soon, 40 years goes by, and here you are. And, you've never really sat down, never had the time to slow down enough to do what needed to be done. So when I retired to the woods, and I was planning on going on a retreat for 1 year. That was 15 years ago. Here, and I had it took a long time, and it took a lot of disciplines that were removed from Christianity to the point where I still consider myself a Christian, but I'm sure there are many of my old Christian friends who think maybe I've gone off the path and all that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, you're always going to, no matter what you do, you'll always be defined by people who will say you're not Christian enough or whatever. And I never pay attention to those people. But it's funny you mentioned that I went to seminary. I was much more jaded when I went to seminary. And I think it's because I was older. And I got really good advice, which was if you can possibly afford it, don't have anybody pay for it. And if you can possibly swing it, do ministry that doesn't require anybody in the congregation to write you a check.
Yeah.
And I thought, dang, okay. And that paid off perfectly because I was never beholden to it. And I opted not to become an Episcopal priest. I chose to be a permanent deacon. And I was very happy with that decision and never regretted that. Because it just gave me all this latitude that to do other things and to also still be involved, which I very much enjoy doing. But I like to do the community stuff. I go to vestry meetings, all this stuff. Man, I dodged a bullet.
I probably much the same time. I decided I was never going to go to a big church. I was going to do part-time churches, and then use that as my base, and then work out from there. And I my first career was in music, so I music. I could become a school teacher, and I got onto teaching comparative religion in college and that kind of thing. But only at the end of my ministry did I ever have a full-time church, and it was a good thing. I do think that there is some DNA involved in that. When I came out here, I had a Bible verse in mind, and when I came out here, when I retired, I stood on the corner of my property that I had to build a road back through, and I had built a house and in the process of building a house. And I was out there looking at it, and I said, "Okay, God, here we go." Jacob of old, I will not let you go until you bless me. And that was the Bible verse that was in my head. I'm going to wrestle with God, and I will not let you go until you bless me. And of course, it comes from the Old Testament passage where Jacob and Esau had their falling out, and Jacob had to flee for his life. And years later, he came back, and he was about to to meet his brother Esau, and he didn't know what was going to happen. And so he was up doing what most of us do, and things like that. He was pacing back and forth. And to this, and the Bible says this man appeared, and they wrestled. And it was only when the day was beginning to dawn that he realized he was wrestling with God. And that's when he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. That was the verse that was in my mind, and he to do that. Little did I know that something else much bigger was happening. A couple of years ago, I was asked to go to Cornwall in the UK and do a seminar, a weekend seminar on the origins of basically the shamanic origins of the world religion. I had a wonderful time with him, but I figured while I was in England, I had to go to this little town called Compton, up northwest of London, because my ancestors were members of the Church of England. They preached in this little stone church in Compton that was still standing. And so together, it was the same church that my great, I don't know how many great-grandfathers preached before they came over here. And I stood in the pulpit and looked around, and I looked at the same stained glass windows that they saw every single Sunday morning, and one that was right smack in front of the pulpit. The pulpit was the best place to see it. I looked at it, and it was something I had never seen in a stained glass window before. It depicted Jacob wrestling with God, saying, I will not let you go until you bless me. How my ancestors could put that into my spiritual DNA to come down here and reveal itself in my life out here in the woods. I don't know, but I want to tell you, made the hair stand on the back of my head. I was sure that something bigger than me was going on.
Did you build any henge then in South Carolina? Did you build like a beer can henge? Did you build any kind of henge?
I built a number of things. As a matter of fact, I probably shouldn't be revealing this out loud because I'll probably be hearing about it. One of the things that we discovered here was stone piles, and getting together with Andrew Collins in writing to him back and forth and everything else. The stone piles were in the shape of the Northern Cross, which is part of Cygnus the Swan. And one of the places that we found was a very spiritual spot on the landscape where we built a medicine wheel. And I made this medicine wheel and stone and around it and everything else, and I laid it all out and doused it and everything else, make sure the earth didn't be right. And retired here, I haven't been in a church now for 15 years. I haven't set foot in a church. I just never have. And so when every 2 years my denomination writes to me and they say, they ask the typical questions, if are you still doing ministry or still doing this? And they said, what church do you worship at? And for the last 15 years I've said, the Church of the Medicine Wheel in Plum Branch, and that's how it goes. Theoretically, I am now the pastor of the Church of the Medicine Wheel in South Carolina.
Well, I love that, and I love the fact that, like St. Francis of Assisi, or my brothers who share that kind of existential outlook, like Thoreau, right? I mean, or Emerson. You're preaching in the cathedral of the woods, and what better cathedral is that?
But it did lead something that, quite frankly, bothers me. After I wrote American Cults, I realized this. One of the things I talked about in American Cults was how cults typically use certain techniques to grow their congregation, to grow their cult around them. For instance, you go to one of these, I call them in the book economic cults with Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes and all that stuff. You're to go to one of these things, and they're having, let's say, a big meeting for newbies at the local hotel or something like that. You get out of your car in the parking lot, you're discouraged. You're there because you're looking for something, you're searching for a community, You're searching for help. You get out of your car, and right away, people are there. They're shaking your hand. They're saying, welcome. Come on in. They go in with you. The music is pumping. Everybody is swaying. Everybody is singing. And they're all greeting each other and hugging each other. It's fantastic. And then the testimonies come out, and the people will stand up one after another, say, I started with nothing. I had $5 in my pocket, and now I'm driving around in a Cadillac. If you just buy this starter kit, you can do that. And then the talented talker comes on the big speaker, and he's inspirational, and the music swells up, and you walk out of that building certain that your life is not different. All kinds of cults use those, but what bothered me was that as a church pastor, I use some of those same methods myself. I always encouraged my congregation to welcome newcomers. We always had music going. If it was a formal service, it was organ music with Bach and Mozart. And if it was a informal service, a contemporary service, we had a really rocking band going, a praise band going. And we would have people would stand up and give testimonies about how their lives are doing this. And I would give some kind of an inspirational speech, and people would go out. Those are all cult methods, and I didn't even realize it until I wrote this book, and I don't know how I could have done anything different. I mean, how else do you do a church service without using some of those methods? But it just made me very much aware of the fact and how easy it is to drop into cult-like habits. All it would take would be a really charismatic type, I use that with a small c, charismatic type minister who gets a following, who believes he can do no wrong and listen to everything he says. And he can build this up, and pretty soon he becomes bigger than the church, and then people follow him, and next thing you know, you've got a cult on the way.
Well, and prosperity theology.
Oh yeah, the prosperity gospel.
Right. That's built into even our economic system is based on you deserve better, and if you work harder, you receive more of fortune's favor, and this is how you can display your gratitude almost to the blessings you have is these ostentatious, somewhat often crass displays of consumerism.
Yeah. And you look around now and you see some ministers of many different denominations, and not just Christian, but other religions as well. You see them living in mansions and driving the big cars and having the jets so they can jet around the world. And you just wonder, what does that have to do with the old feeding the poor? Just meek and mild. What does it have to do with that? Right. And yet, people go with it. If Jim Baker did it, he was just absolutely convinced that you got $10 in your name. That's it. Okay, send that $10 to me, and God will bless you. And the prosperity gospel. And if it doesn't happen, and the people say, well, what I set my money in it, God didn't bless me. Well, it must be something you're doing wrong.
Right. It's built in. It's like a built-in excuse, which is, again, kind of where cults come into it, is the adherent that follows whoever that leader is it buys in at such a level that it doesn't take much convincing for them to think, well, I must be the problem because they're perfect. This is 100% true. So I'm the one who has to be trying hard.
Yeah, and cults will even take it one step farther. You begin to say, well, why am I not all jazzed up like I am when I come here? Maybe your family is bringing you down because they haven't bought into it. Maybe your friends. Maybe you better leave your family behind. You better leave your friends behind because they're slowing you down. This is your new family. Bingo.
We're all you need.
Yeah.
So, and this also then leads to how murder happens.
Yeah.
This becomes, you get so upside down, and this is the story of American cults that start, with the original pilgrims, the original Puritans that came over that ended up hanging people or burning them or crushing them on drowning them. This there was the kind of psychosexual torture that went on. It obviously speaks to a kind of sublimation that a lot of people have been doing with their own sexual interests, and they get to take it out on what becomes essentially a subhuman. And or a soul that needs saving, and we're going to get out on what becomes essentially a subhuman. And or a soul that needs saving, and we're going to save this soul by first removing all of her clothing. That's telling what happened to Joan of Arc, or what happened with some of the famous martyrs in Europe.
Yeah. Earlier we talked about the People's Temple, the Full Gospel Church, Jim Jones. That's a classic example. Jim Jones started as a Methodist preacher from Indiana, a little church on the corner. He got a following. As his following began to grow, he went to see Father Divine in New York, the Peace Mission. And he had to talk to Father Divine, how do I handle this? Because it's growing and it's going to become a movement. And then when they were just about done, he had a famous meeting with Father Divine when he said, I have a question to ask you. Some of the women in my congregation find themselves showing themselves that they seem very excited. How do I deal with that? And Father Divine looked at him and said, you must bring these feelings to the surface where they can be dealt with. And Jones just smiled and said, here we go.
Yeah. We chatted a lot in that last half hour, and I do want to get back to the story that I think is still developing from Kenya about yet another discovery. But first, American Cults List continues on Coast to Coast.
What these pieces of country music and exclusive deals have in common? A chance to rock out the country's biggest superstars. Just this month's Valpac Blue Envelope for your chance to win a trip to the iHeart Country Festival. Scan the QR code and stream an iHeart Country station. Then listen for details on how to enter the sweepstakes. You can win $100 instantly just by opening your envelope. Head to your mailbox to learn more today. No purchase necessary. More prohibited. See specially marked Valpac envelopes or Valpac.com for details.
Are you a business owner, CEO, or responsible for marketing? If you are, iHeart Media can help you reach your goals and find new customers. We reach more consumers in your target area than anyone else, and we can give you access to those potential customers more cost effectively across radio, digital, podcasting, and social. We love to show you how iHeart Media can work for you. Get started today at iHeartAdvertising.com. That's iHeartAdvertising.com.
Imagine it's the last ride, but your symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome and constipation or IBS-C are getting for that. What should you do? Keep managing your constipation with belly pain the same old way, or try getting ahead of your symptoms by talking to your doctor about treating it with Linzess. Linaclotide. Linzess is a prescription medicine that treats IBS-C in adults. It's not a laxative. It's a once daily pill that helps you get ahead of your symptoms. It's proven to help you have more frequent and complete bowel movements and helps relieve overall abdominal symptoms, belly pain, discomfort, and bloating. Symptoms were studied in combination, not individually.
Do not give Linzess to children less than 2. It may harm them. Do not take Linzess if you have a bowel blockage. Get immediate help if you develop unusual or severe stomach pain, especially with bloody or black stools. The most common side effect is diarrhea, sometimes severe. If it's severe, stop taking Linzess and call your doctor right away. Other side effects include gas, stomach area pain, and swelling.
Imagine what can relief from IBS-C mean for you. Talk to your doctor and say yes to Linzess. Learn more at Linzess.com or call 1-800-LINZESS.
KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk. KFI live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
The news has been updated. Click to refresh. KFI. Los Angeles, Orange County. Live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
Shooting in Hollywood and Highland. I'm Amy King in the KFI 24-hour newsroom. A person has been shot in the head at Hollywood Boulevard and Highland Avenue in Hollywood. LAPD says the person was taken to the hospital. There's no word on their condition. Police say a man who was suspected to be the shooter and a woman involved took off and got onto a metro train to North Hollywood. Police say the man who allegedly stabbed Cash App founder Bob Lee to death and got into an argument with him because Lee may have been in a relationship with the man's sister, who's married. Lee was stabbed 3 times with a 4-inch kitchen knife in the Rincon neighborhood of San Francisco last week. Two police officers in Torrance have been indicted for fatally shooting a man they say believed was reaching for a gun.
Prosecutors say Christopher DeAndre Mitchell was about to be detained by the officers for stealing a Honda in 2018. The cops shot Mitchell 3 times, saying they believed he was reaching for a gun, which turned out to be an air rifle. Former LA County DA Jackie Lacey refused to file charges, saying the officers were justified in using deadly force. LA County DA George Gaston reopened the case as part of his campaign promise. The officers were indicted yesterday and are expected to be arraigned next week. Chris Adler, KFI News.
So I survived the pandemic, but I'm not surviving the crime.
A business owner in the San Fernando Valley says she's shutting down her stores because one of them has been robbed 6 times. Yvette's beauty supply owner is at Ingram Health KPLA. Her store in Tarzana was robbed again Wednesday night.
It's taken a toll on my health. I found out that I'm diabetic, I have high blood pressure, because all of my focus being on the stores, not on my body. And I literally almost died because of these stores.
Ingram says the thieves stole about $25,000 worth of merchandise from her store. She says she's closing all her locations, including 4 she opened during the pandemic, because of the repeated theft and her health issues. Southland weather from KFI, sunny after morning clouds clear out tomorrow. Highs in the mid-60s to low 70s at the beaches, Metro LA and Inland OC. Upper 60s to mid-70s for the valleys and Antelope Valley. Near 80s for the IE. Morning clouds, afternoon sun for Sunday with highs in the low 70s to low 80s, about 5 to 10 degrees cooler as we head into next week. It's 56 in Brea, 54 Lake Forest, 55 in Marina Del Rey, 56 in Burbank. We lead local in the KFI 24-hour newsroom. I'm Amy King.
In Bell Gardens, there is a work zone. This is on the 7th southbound from Florence to Rosecrans Avenue. Franklin's going to be shut down for road work until 5. In South LA, we have good news. Earlier cracks on the 110 southbound right before MLK have been cleared from lanes. Your drive is recovering in that area. In Griffith Park, this is on the 5 northbound right before Zoo Drive. We have cleanup crews from an earlier crack. Taking up the right lanes. Your drive is slow from Los Feliz. KFI, the guy helps get you there faster. I'm Brian Van. Are you looking to sell your home quickly and easily without having to deal with repairs or the worry of buyers qualifying for new high interest rate loans? Call Sellers Advantage. With thousands of satisfied customers, they are the go-to choice for homeowners looking to sell their homes fast. They will buy your home for a competitive cash offer and they can close in just days, not weeks or months. No repairs are needed because they buy homes as is. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and with the most 5-star reviews on Google and Yelp. It's no wonder why thousands of sellers have chosen Sellers Advantage. Sellers Advantage is the fastest and most stress-free way to sell your home. If you're ready to sell your home, you call Sellers Advantage. Get a no-obligation offer at 888-3-OFFER at 888-321-AS-IS. 888-321-AS-IS. 888-321-2747. SellersAdvantage.com. DRE number 01961658.
Fort Sam's was a mess. Always itching, lifting. His paws were soaking wet. He had bald spots on his back. In weeks after he started Dynamite, I started seeing great improvements. And today, 99% of his issues are non-existent. Dynamite is nutrition. Dynamite is the best thing you can do for your dog.
How happy your dog will be.
I get my Dynamite from DINOVITE.com.
Did you know you can get your prescriptions for less at your local pharmacy? You can with GoodRx. It's the free app that can save you money on your medication. Just search for your prescription, choose the pharmacy and the price that works best for you, and then show your GoodRx coupon to your pharmacist at the drop-off counter. GoodRx works at over 70,000 pharmacies, including Walmart, Rite Aid, and Walgreens, and it works whether you have insurance or not. It's easy to save. Next time you drop off your prescription, check GoodRx. To start saving today, go to GoodRx.com. GoodRx is not insurance.
Are you tired? Or are you actually just searching for random water friends to help hydrate, feel understand, to help you?
Like these uncertain okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. CalHope can help. Access CalHope's free and secure resources. Call 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org.
I'm John Morgan of Morgan & Morgan. When I set out to build our firm, it was built for greatness. It was built for you. For over 35 years, my mission has been to deliver more for our clients, to deliver more for you. Morgan & Morgan has more offices, more staff, and more lawyers than any other injury firm in the world. If you or anyone in your family has been injured, call America's largest injury law firm. Call Morgan & Morgan or thepeople.com. Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you. Termite problems? Search PacificCoastTermite.com or call 800-PACIFIC.
KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. From coast to coast and worldwide on the internet, this is Coast to Coast AM with Ian Bunnett.
No, that's a fun cult. That's a cult I would join. Most cults aren't that much fun in either American history or world history. We have another example of it. We've been talking about it with our guest, Jim Willis, author of the book American Cults, Cabals, Corruption, and the Charismatic Leaders. You can link it to him directly through coasttocoastam.com. We're an hour away from doing open lines. I may throw off topic. They don't usually do that, but just for six, maybe you saw the list that came from the Library of Congress. They've added 25 more American songs to the canon. These are indisputable American hits, and I say, on a couple of them. That'll be hours. This fun. It's Friday night. Jim will continue his next. We'll talk about this story of Kenya. If you haven't heard of it, I think you'll be hearing about it more if everything that's being said about it turns out to be true. On Coast to Coast AM, in for George Norrie, this is Ian.
Consumer Cellular is the most trusted wireless brand, and they've been providing superior nationwide coverage for more than 25 years. Switch today and save up to half on your wireless bill. They offer unlimited talk and text with flexible data plans starting at just $20 a month. Their award-winning customer service team makes switching easy. Keep your phone and number, and activation is free. Plus, you can add a family member to your plan for just $15 a month per line. Never worry about dropped calls because Consumer Cellular has the exact same coverage as the major carriers. Coverage to over 99% of the nation. And this is all backed by their 100% risk-free guarantee. Also, with Consumer Cellular, you can save up to $250 a year. Go to consumercellular.com/Nori, and for a limited time, get $25 off your wireless bill when you use promo code NORI. That's consumercellular.com/Nori, and use promo code NORI for $25 off. When banks fail, when bonds are devalued, and the stock market is in turmoil, you'll be glad you own gold, and now you can own gold in a retirement account. That's right. Birch Gold will help you convert an old IRA or 401k into an IRA physical gold. Just text the word COAST to 989898 and get a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just valuable insights. Protect your savings with gold from Birch Gold. Text COAST to 989898.
Angie's List is now Angie, and we've heard a lot of theories about why. I thought it was an eco-boost. Yours, less paper,
They wish they could sell it faster. No, it's to be more iconic.
must be interesting. So it's not quite right. It's because now you can compare our stock prices, book a service instantly, and even get your project handled from start to finish. How easy. So more than just a wig. Get started at Angie.com. That's ANGI. Or download the app today.
Talking with Jim Willis, American Colts, Couples, Corruption, and Charismatic Leaders. We gave a pretty good definition earlier about what makes a cult, and I know that some people get sensitive about that word cult. For that matter, they may also be sensitive about cult leader. And that is frequently a sign that somebody is falling into a cult, is when they become really defensive about the leader. Like, you don't understand him or her, you know, they just, you don't get it. This is too special, this is too precious. What you have to do is you have to listen to these tapes, or you have to go through this book, or you have to, you know, attach these wire coat hangers to your earlobes and put them up to your car battery or something. You know, there's like a way that you have to prove that you're worthy to get the word. And that is often the difference how people start to react around their family and friends as they pull away. So as we were talking about it, we were talking about the DNA of American history. Are there some cults that you think most people actually don't know about from the last couple hundred years?
I'm sure there are. Some of them are thankfully no longer with us, but they're usually involving small numbers of people who have never got the press. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Word of Faith Fellowship and the Gospel of Prosperity that was up in North Carolina, Jane Whaley and her group. When we talk about that Westboro Baptist Church, ones that made headlines by going out and picketing funerals with big signs saying God hates Jews and gays.
Right. I've been yelled at by that. It's pleasure. Yeah, I've been yelled at by that.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, I was sort of like, oh, cool. I kind of hate it. Thank you. I don't want to give you money.
And a lot of those kinds of groups, people are not so much aware. Frankly, one of the ones that scared me more than anything else, it not scared me, it just made me so, it was so discouraging. Very often, the anthill kid, the one who grew his flock by fathering 20 kids by 9 different women, and basically went on to use torture for these kids in the name of discipline.
Yeah.
It's just terrible.
Taking multiple lives, as you point out, you know, because we left off a little bit with the story of Jim Jones, but you know, that idea, I mean, we saw David Koresh that when he said, no, your wives are mine now, God said, and so are your daughters.
20 wives. He said, you know, God said go out and procreate, and what he said, well, I was the one who was supposed to procreate, not you guys. So he had 20 different wives. He was the only one who was permitted to have sex. He began to think his lips, and when the ANF tried to send some warrants, they started shooting at him. They opened fire on him. 4 agents were killed. The FBI eventually wound up surrounding the whole compound and it was for 51 days. I think this was back in the early 90s, maybe 3, something like that.
It was a disaster, but this is interesting when we talk about Waco, and there's still some people that get very sensitive about this, and there's some really good documentaries on TV. There's a really good one on Netflix, which I know you probably don't catch up in the woods, but
no, yeah, believe it or not, I do.
Do you do? Because there's a really good new doc about Waco. But part of what I think, and I've always said this, so I'll say it, and you don't say it, and everyone else has to say it. But the FBI, okay, so the FBI screwed up because they're made out of human beings, and human beings can only do what they know how to do from their training and from their experience. And if they were ill-equipped to deal with a situation like this, mostly because this was such an extreme example of something that, although it had happened a lot, hadn't happened in a while.
Yeah.
So, and then you have a situation where what you really needed, I think, and I know they had probably somebody on the phone to talk to, or maybe somebody at Yale Divinity School, but if any theologian or any religious historian could have told where this was going, because it always ends up this way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I've always said, man, I wish they'd called me because David Koresh was working on a book on the book of Revelation, and he was working on it day and night. It was consuming him, and he was giving all of these sermons based on his work to his congregation. And what he told them was, the end is coming. The bad guys are coming for the good guys. We're the good guys. We have to be prepared. And when the end comes, it's going to come with confusion and noise and lights in the sky and gunfire and fire and everything else. And when the FBI finally moved in, these people, of course, this before people had cell phones, as far as these people in the compound were concerned, what was happening to them was exactly what David Koresh had said was going to happen. It just reinforced his whole idea of the end times. They didn't know that they were the only people in the world this was happening to because they couldn't communicate with anybody else. As far as they're concerned, it wasn't just a single compound in Waco. It might have been happening all over the world. So what happened was the FBI played it by the book. And what they did was go in and reproduce almost exactly with the loud rock music and the speakers 24 hours a day. They reproduced exactly the situation that David Koresh said was going to happen at the end of the day. And so his people just said, wow, he was right. This is it for the end. And they began to look to Jesus. And how that fire started, it's still up in the air. Nobody knows whether it was started from within by the people themselves or whether one of the smoke bombs the FBI used lit something off. How it started, I don't know. But
Yeah, but so
I don't think they needed to.
no, they didn't. And but part of that is you would have had to have come at it from instead of. I mean, the sort of binary imperative was David Koresh, is he the Messiah or isn't he? Which really should never have come down to that because that's what actually pushes the question that, well, he is. The second in that triangle is, regardless of what you think, he is part of a long line of people who have pushed authorities, pushed the crown, pushed whatever it was that they said they were standing against, to the point where they reacted to that person just in the way that they predicted because it was predictable. And there was nothing. David Koresh's situation isn't any different than what happened in Europe 200 years earlier or 300 years before that. And that's really truly the sad part. I mean, other than the loss of life, is how easily this might have been avoided if they had gone down a different negotiating path. But let's go back to the story because I want to share this for people who didn't know it, and I just think it's fascinating because again, it comes down to this same concept of a cult leader not wanting to be revealed for the charlatan that they are, and willing to see everybody else around them die so they don't have to admit that they're wrong. Kenya police are investigating the deaths of 4 people. This is from yesterday, suspected to have starved to death on the orders of the leader of the controversial cult. Pastor Mackenzie Ntenge is alleged to have told his followers in the coastal city of Khalifa to starve themselves in the hope of getting to heaven quickly. Following a tip, police found 15 seriously ill people, including 11 made it to the hospital. And this is the part that starts to sound really familiar. Police have also been warned that the good news one box in an unidentified place in the Chapapola Forest. And that's the part where it's like, okay, that's where it's Jonestown all over.
Yeah. 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 It is that whole thing seems to represent a step by step path down a road that just leads to doom. We talk about it at Jonestown. 913 people drank the Kool-Aid, which really wasn't Kool-Aid.
Poor Kool-Aid has been blamed for that
with cyanide. And 304 of them were children. And when I think about what that must have been like to follow the leader and basically murder your own children, and then take your own life, and for the people who weren't strong enough, they were killed, they were murdered, and then at the height of it all, Jim Jones shoots himself. It's such a tragedy.
But a predictable one, again, getting out of there alive, you could report it differently than the story that you know sometimes.
Right.
You know, I want to ask you, so I'm curious about something that you said last hour. Again, we're talking with Jim Lewis, author of American Cults, Cobbles, Corruption, and Charismatic Leaders. You're talking about the idea of preserving doctrine for doctrine's sake. It's cults. That it becomes so important that even when the teaching of the church or the practices of the church it no longer bear fruit, they're not relevant anymore, that it becomes essential to keep doing them because it ties people back to a time somehow when that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When we use the word cult, too, we have to remember it is applied to a lot of different groups. Christian theologians, for instance, talk about the first couple of centuries of Christianity. They used the term cult embedded in Judaism. And that's really exactly what it was. It was a cult of followers. And we read about it in the Apostle Paul and in the book of Acts, how the church was gathering together and they shared meals and they were all of one, they were all in one accord and everything else. And eventually there seemed to be problems of doctrine in the cult. Peter, the book of Acts tells us a story about the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, and then Paul talks about it in Galatians as well, about how basically Peter was leader of one faction of the cult, which said you have to first become Jewish in order to be Christian, and Paul was saying, no, we got to open this up, to the Gentiles and everything else. But basically, it was, you can read that whole history of the early church in the Bible, and in the letters of Paul and Peter, and in the book of Acts, and you can really just trace step by step. They were following almost the exact same path that cults usually follow. There is a saying in theology, which I really like, cult plus time equals religion. Basically, every single world religion began with a founder who was a group of followers. And his original idea, his original breakthrough, his original concept of the other, of God, became the impetus to found this group. And then the group grew and it grew and it grew. And pretty soon the founder was gone. And the people started to build doctrines and dogmas. And then what do we have from an original spiritual experience? You wind up with first a cult and then a religion of some kind.
Yeah, but that religion often then, too, in replicating something of the past, we teach, religions, cults often teach the rituals that say bring life meaning, or they must be observed, or everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And that's where it seems like a lot of cults cross, the political lines and other stuff, which is you have to do this or it's all over. This is what's holding the door back. And that's the scary part, because then it puts the onus on the followers just to keep doing something, even if they don't necessarily know why.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a church or something and had people tell me about we do this or we do that, and I say why, and it's all the famous idea. Like what? Back in the I was pastor of a church for 3 years,